Great. All right, great. Lady T, over to you. Thank you. Lady T, you're on mute.
Yeah, greetings, everyone. My name is Tekla Mbumwe, and I am the community lead for Wavefront Cloud. I would like to officially welcome you all today to this very special session where we have a guest speaker in our midst. Thanks to the All Builders Grant Program, Yolanda and myself were able to attend the AWS reInvent in Las Vegas in November last year, where we met and networked with Curtis. Today, we are very delighted to welcome Curtis in our community. Curtis is a principal developer advocate specializing in infrastructure, storage, and data management. He has worked in the IT industry for a number of years as a developer, a systems admin, a technical consultant, and a data center ops manager. Curtis did join AWS in 2016 and has helped customers migrate legacy applications, developed new cloud solutions, and execute various digital transformation initiatives. He has a passion for technology and enjoys helping others on their learning journey. And this passion is what has brought him here today. So Curtis, before we deep dive into S3, I would like to tell you a little bit about my community. So Wavefront Cloud was founded in September 2020 by Fomi Banjikango. And our mission is offering cloud computing training with special focus to youths and those without IT background. And also on the Wavefront Cloud leadership, we have Nyuyu Tata as team lead. Wavefront Cloud has been blessed with a lot of volunteers as instructors. Some of them you will meet here today. And as you already know, Yolanda is our lead instructor at Wavefront Cloud. And before we dive into this session today, I would like to just give some few housekeeping rules. I will encourage all the members to stay mute when they are not speaking. And you can also ask your questions real time by using the raise hand feature. Alternatively, you can drop them in the chat. And at the end of the session, a survey link will be shared. And I am pleading and expecting you all to complete it. I can't really overemphasize the importance of feedback, as it would help our presenter Curtis, and it will also help us in planning future sessions. So Curtis, our community has been looking forward to listening and learning from you. You are the first person from AWS we are receiving in Wavefront Cloud. And we are so excited, and I hope you are ready to take over this conversation. Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Tekla. I really appreciate that. Can everyone hear me just fine, by the way? Awesome. I heard the request of having everyone just kind of post where they are. I see we've got Switzerland on board. We've got some folks from England. Would love to hear from everybody else as well, too. Please, if you would just take a moment, drop in the chat. Would just love to know where you're joining us from. Certainly want to thank you for taking some time out of your Saturday evening in your respective locations to join us. I'm here in the southeastern United States. For those of you that may have some awareness of the geographic layout of the United States, I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, just due south of New York City. As Tekla mentioned earlier, I had the pleasure of meeting both her and Yolanda back in Las Vegas during the reInvent conference. I remember it clearly. It was a very cold evening. I was a little tired. I happened to see them over there and I was like, hey, that looks like a nice inviting twosome I can come over and make an introduction to. And we hit it off with our introductions. We had a great conversation. And that choice encounter has kind of led us to where we are today. That was where I first learned about Wifrin Cloud. And, you know, immediately I was like, yes, I would love to find an opportunity to connect with the community at some point, be able to provide what I can from a learning and just knowledge gaining perspective. So super excited we were finally able to bring this to bear. If I may, real quick, I will add one additional housekeeping rule. Well, two actually. I want everyone to relax and I want everyone to have fun and be engaged. This is really your session. So I'm not a formal instructor, but I do know the knowledge or the subject matter pretty well. But I think it will only be best enhanced if I can get everyone to really participate. Don't be afraid to ask any questions. It can be specifically around the S3 object storage service. If there are other areas within the AWS foundations of compute or security or networking that you may want to incorporate in it, feel free to throw a question in there as well too. We'd be happy to kind of discuss it in real time, somewhat briefly. We'll try to keep the focus on the S3 here today. But again, the whole point is that this is you all's time, and it's just an honor for me to be able to be on board just to share whatever perspective I can, get a little understanding of where each of you are in your learning journeys. I heard during the introductions that we have several people on board that are very, very new to AWS. Welcome. We're certainly glad to have you here. I've also heard some mentioning of some of you that are already taking your exams, which is wonderful. I hope you passed and are going to be able to move yourselves into the next level of associate training or maybe even professional for that matter. And again, this is a very welcoming space. It's a very great industry to be a part of. And I think, I believe this wholeheartedly, that there is going to be an opportunity for us all to be able to fit in and to be able to succeed. So super excited about that. I do have any other questions from anyone off the top before we get into it here? Okay, sounds like we might be good. Can everyone see my share, by the way?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay,
definitely.
perfect. Now I do have some slides here, but again, I think I would like to just maybe use them more as a guide as opposed to just anything that we're going to try to extend the entirety of the time around. Again, with your interaction, with some of the questions that you may have, I want us to be able to just, kind of leverage them wherever necessary to kind of help us along. I even have an opportunity to access my AWS Management Console, which is where we all know that being able to access a service like S3 happens. For those of you that may have limited experience or even no familiarity with the S3 Management Console for that matter, it'll give us an opportunity to give you a better view of what it means to go and access an S3 bucket or, understand what sort of S3 objects lies within or anything related to that matter. I'm one who is a big believer of anything that you learn by way of the management console within an AWS environment. The way you really get to learn more about the product, learn more about the services, and not only be able to scale use, but be able to scale your knowledge and understanding is to use the command line interface as well too. I'll tread lightly in terms of how we may or may not use the command line interface today. But again, I want to just make sure that everyone is aware of the different means by which you can actually interact with a very large, very global service like AWS and S3 in particular to be able to do things, whether it's building up an environment or running applications, things of that nature. So I'm sorry, it sounds like it may have heard a question or a comment a second ago. We're all good. Okay, perfect. All right. So as I mentioned just a second ago, for those of you that have some awareness of the United States, I'm based there in Atlanta, which is just below the Big Apple, aka New York City. There you can see it's somewhat a ways away from Las Vegas, where it was mentioned. I had the pleasure of meeting these two lovely ladies here. As you can see, we're having a good time. We're a little bundled up because it was very cold that night. But nonetheless, we had ourselves a really good time. So, and again, in terms of just talking about the S3 service itself, want to lay the foundation around some of what we discussed today. And it all should have some sort of tie-in or some relation to what it is that actual companies do when they use not only AWS, but in particular, the storage services. Hopefully you have come across in some of your learnings that when you think of data being stored within a cloud environment like AWS, and let me also mention off the top, AWS is just one of several large global cloud platforms out there. Yes, there is an offering from Microsoft in the form of their Azure platform. Yes, Google Cloud and their Google Cloud platform is also a similar offering. So, as an employee of AWS, as someone who has over 7 years of AWS experience, I know that platform a lot better than those others. I get every impression that most of the learnings that you guys are focused on is on the AWS platform as well too, which is great. I really say all that to say that always make sure that you do have an opportunity just to kind of learn cloud concepts in general as well too. That'll only just extend your knowledge and your ability to go out and speak in terms of understanding and eventually one day being able to work within environments, because believe it or not, there are companies out there, large companies that often have some variant of multiple clouds within their operations. I'm a little biased. I admit that. I would love for everybody to run on the AWS platform, but that's certainly not always the case. But again, as far as you and your learnings are concerned, don't be afraid to extend your learnings around cloud concepts, around cloud foundations, beyond just the AWS cloud. But here again, I'm just showing just several representative use cases where customers are using a service like S3 and data management within cloud to be able to accomplish things. I think that first one there is a very obvious one. As we know, as companies, as organizations, it's always important to make sure that we've got safekeeping amongst our data, meaning having backups. Quite frankly, that's really no different than what we as personal computer users within our own respective homes and locations also have some sort of data protection. So in terms of just having S3 as that kind of global service, backup and restore abilities is always a huge plus. I'll share some other information a little later just to kind of give you a broader understanding of just how big a global service AWS S3 is. And in fact, if I can invite everyone right now, if you want to play along, if you had to think about AWS S3 as a global storage service, give me a guess as to how many objects, and we'll talk a little bit about objects. Objects basically being just a piece of storage or a piece of data that you can store within an S3 bucket. Give me just a guess of what you think, how many objects are stored within S3 as a global service. And I'll look for your responses shortly, and then we'll talk about it within the context of where
but I just say when I mean those no. Along prevent I mean those.
Okay, we're good.
Sorry about that. Yeah, that's okay.
No worries. Yeah, just to step back up here. In addition to backup and restore, there's certainly means of having archive and compliance in order to be able to leverage a service like that. For those of you that may be familiar with more traditional multi-user compute environments, And by that, I mean typically Linux environments. If you've ever logged onto a Linux server, you have your own user directory space. Your coworkers or colleagues may have their own as well too. Think of S3 as a service that's actually able to offer kind of similar capabilities in terms of having kind of personal, dedicated storage space for various users within an organization or within an academic institution, et cetera. And then, of course, there's the business critical applications. There's a good chance that if you use a very popular, very large, very global website in your day-to-day lives, a service like S3 is behind that. If you think about doing like mobile and digital banking, if you think about using streaming services, and by streaming services, I'm not sure if Netflix or Disney Plus or some of those other global streaming services are popular within your respective locations. But anytime you go out to stream a movie or a video or something, and you go and access that piece of video content, there's a good chance that that's going to be retrieved in a service like S3 and then provided to you so that you can watch it for your enjoyment. Again, we'll get into more use cases about S3 as a service and how it's beneficial to large global organizations. We talked a little bit about backup restore solutions. This is also becoming another very popular space within the use case for a service like S3. Data lakes within large organizations are all the rage, and effectively what a data lake is where a company can basically land all the different structured and unstructured data across their organization so that they can use it to build more meaningful information, more intelligence about their customers. Think about a hotel chain when they want to be able to cater to global travelers. Every time you as a customer go and stay at a particular hotel chain around the world, there's some level of information they have about you. You know, where you're from, what do you like in terms of your hotel preferences and room types. What other properties have you stayed in? What has been your length of stay? And then being able to use that sort of information, which can ultimately be extracted out of a data lake, are the things that they can do as an organization to build more insights, build more business intelligence, so that they can continue to offer a better experience for you. I go back to the example of streaming movie and entertainment services. Again, we have the Netflix service here in the US. Anytime I go and access Netflix to want to watch some level of entertainment, they use information that's stored about me and similar subscribers like me in a data lake. They have the ability to process and analyze that information, where possible, run some machine learning models and inference against that information, and be able to be a little more smarter about me as a consumer so that they can offer what they think might be the different types of movies, documentaries, TV shows that I may want to enjoy. And quite frankly, it's a pretty useful service. I'm almost reliant upon it anytime I go out and want to watch something, because I don't always necessarily know what it is that I would like to watch. So I'm actually relying on the service to, hey, I pay you X amount of money per month. Help me find something that you think I'm going to like. And I actually find the ability to have that beneficial. And again, I know there's a lot of other application and service layers beyond just the data and storage, but the ability for that to even happen in the first place really starts at the ability to store and manage the data, which is where something like an S3 would be super helpful there. For those of you that may have already gone through some level of course training and curriculum on S3 services, these are probably some of the areas you have found also where we taught kind of the benefits of a service like S3. Durability is first and at the top almost for a reason, because it's a very good service in terms of what it can provide within that space. Same thing could be said for something like resiliency, as well as the availability. If you think about S3 being what we dub as kind of storage for the internet, having the ability to access that from anywhere is a huge benefit for a service like S3. I won't go into all of these exhaustively, but again, we will be able to touch on a lot of these at some point throughout the presentation today in terms of the security and compliance controls that are there. Again, we've already talked about some of the business insights for data. And then there's even the component of ways that you can actually bring the S3 service or excuse me, bring data objects from other locations, whether they're in existing data centers or on a hard drive from your local computer, for that matter, that you can store them up into a service like S3. Talked a little bit about durability. I want everybody, has anybody ever heard of the term design for 11 nines of durability? Anyone here today familiar with that term? And Tekla, Yolanda, I may rely on you to check into the chat window to see if we've gotten any responses to that end. I can't see it at the moment while I'm presenting.
For now, there is none.
Okay, well, let's talk about this a little bit. As you can see here, this graphic is basically representing what we dub as durability in 3 different forms. There's the 99.99, also commonly referred to as the 4 nines of durability. And then on the far right there, we have the 11 nines of durability, which you can see with the additional 9s. It certainly speaks to anytime you go and store a piece of data somewhere, just how durable is it? Meaning, is that data going to always be there when I need it? Think about it in a small scale in terms of you having a local PC at your respective location, and then you save a file there. Yes, you have just been able to save that file to your hard drive. Yes, you are relying upon that hard drive being able to always store that piece of data when you need it. And this happens even when you turn the machine off, power it back on, you're able to go out there and access that data, correct? For the most part, it's already durable. What happens if that hard drive fails and that happens to be the only place you have that data? It's lost, right? That speaks to the limited amount of durability that exists within having what I would refer to as kind of a single point of failure. You know, you are singly relying upon that hard drive to always maintain that piece of data when you need it. And that's a measure of durability that's not quite as robust as what we're seeing here. For this 4 nines of durability to the left, this is what happens when you've got 2 copies of that same data in a given site. If in the unfortunate event that the first drive or piece of medium fails, you can rely on it in another piece. That speaks to the durability there. Always good to have a backup copy. Now, what causes a potential problem here is that, as you can see, both copies are at a single site. What happens if we lose access to the entire site? Then yeah, there is the potential for both copies of that data to be lost. If we move over to the middle example there, now this is a scenario where we've got a single copy of the data in 2 separate sites. It almost, well, it doesn't almost, it actually does, as you can see by the additional 9, increases the level of durability that you now have in access to that data. If one of the tape devices were to fail, you can access it on the other. If one of the sites were to be unreachable, then yes, you can go and access the data from a separate site. That speaks to the increased durability of having the ability to go and grab your data from elsewhere. Where I'm getting to all this is, as if you think about S3 as a global, scalable, durable service that I've been referring to, and what I'm sure you guys have come across in your learnings, every time you go and store an object in an S3 bucket, that thing is getting stored across a number of different storage mediums, across a number of different sites, which results in this larger 11 nines of durability. you can have drives failing, you can have sites going offline, but because we've got it stored in multiple locations, that thereby increases the likelihood that anytime you go and access that data, it's going to be there for you. Would love to hear maybe some thoughts or perspectives from you guys later in terms of that. But I just want you to understand that one of the things that you are learning as you start to work with a service like S3 is knowing that it's building some level of durability for you, or the company or the customer you may be serving at that time, so that you can speak to one of the very important one of the inherent benefits of having a global cloud service that can provide that for you. Don't want to go a whole lot into to manageability. A lot of these will come into play when we start looking at some of the different examples and working with the command line that I talked about earlier. But here is just think of this as a summary of, if you think about S3 as a service within the broader ecosystem of AWS services that you are all learning about, and not to rattle off all the names, but obviously there are going to be things like EC2 that you're learning about. We're certainly learning about networking and VPCs. We're learning about security and how something like identity and access management, or IAM, which I'm sure most of you are familiar with, speaks to the ability to keep things safe, only allowing those with access to it to have access to the data. Pretty much fits into what we're showing here. Most of these are still kind of relegated to the broader service of S3, but and then we'll talk about different storage classes. But once you put data into an S3 bucket, all of these benefits in terms of being able to manage those objects start to come into play in terms of what you can do. We'll talk a little bit about replication. Again, replication is another method in terms of what we talk about in terms of making sure that we have copies of data available in multiple locations. I just talked about that 11 nines of durability a second ago. You even increase that, or you certainly gain more benefit of that 11 nines of durability when you start doing replication, which is, say a US-based company stores all of their data in an AWS region somewhere in the United States. The S3 service, when you enable replication, actually gives you the ability to go and move it into another region. It could be Paris, it could be Sao Paulo, Brazil, it could be Tokyo, it could be Sydney, anywhere. That AWS platform and that global capability gives you the ability to move those objects. Doesn't matter how many you've got. It could be a handful of objects, or it could be tens of millions of objects to be able to add to that durability.
Yeah, Curtis, there's a question you asked about how much data can be stored in an S3. I see a couple of people, infinite, unlimited, over 100 trillion. So I don't know if you want to make a comment on that.
Yeah. So what do you guys think about the 100 trillion number? Does that sound like just, come on, there's no way that's possible? I'd love to get some perspective there.
That sounds possible to me. I don't.
It
I think
does
it's
sound
possible. I'll maybe say maybe over 100, more than, like you said, over 100 trillion. That sounds.
Yeah. I mean, and let's be honest, a trillion is a large number. It actually happens to be right.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a nice one.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about, so, and let me provide a little history and perspective as well, too. The S3 service started back in 2006. So, and for those of you that may have been following some of the recent learning events, we just had our AI ML Innovate, which was basically a series of online talks and sessions. And part of the AI ML Innovate that we just did, we just celebrated Pi Day, which is March 14th. As we all know, Pi is 3.14 and God knows how many other numbers within that decimal space to follow. But anyway, Pi Day also happened to mark the 17th anniversary of S3 as a service. So if you can imagine a service having been around for 17 years, if you can imagine a service that's always been designed to store objects at scale, and then I talked about all those different use cases, backup archiving, business critical applications, compliance, websites, etc. Throughout the course of that 17-year history of Amazon S3 being a service, the amount of objects that have been amassed over the entirety of that service throughout these global S3 buckets has exceeded the 200 trillion object mark globally. That's a phenomenal number. Just think about, again, if compare that, imagine if you had to store 200 trillion objects across a number of laptop computers or desktop computers. I mean, those things would probably stack to the moon and back. It would be so many of them. So that really does speak to just a very massive, very, very global service that this S3 is. And I don't have the numbers to share with you, but if we think about how we as consumers and people in everyday lives use data every day, social media videos, I talked about streaming services. Think about how space programs and science are tracking astronomical data, things of that nature. I mean, it's just a phenomenal scale. There are even some estimates of data rates growing at exabytes per day. It's just really phenomenal. I say all that to say is that those things have to be stored somewhere, and as just a small service within the greater or larger landscape of being able to store data globally. That's how much S3 is amassed, and it doesn't even begin to scratch the surface in terms of global data storage as a whole. What we do with a service like S3, we're always putting data in, we're always getting data out, we're always accessing data, retrieving it, making sure that the data integrity maintains. So you're always performing some sort of operation on that data within S3. That second number there in that line around capacity and throughput speaks to every second there's over 100 million requests being made to do something against an S3 object somewhere, whether it's a put to retrieve it, or a put to upload it, a get to retrieve that data, or anything else associated with that. That events metric there also speaks to it too. For some of you that may have heard about some of the various AWS services that fall within that serverless landscape, a lot of those serverless services that we make available for customers today and they use, Lambda being an example, a service like AWS Lambda, which is serverless compute, actually leverages a service like S3 under the hood as well too. If I go and upload my Lambda code so that the Lambda function can run it at some point, that's got to be stored somewhere. It's stored in a service like S3. All of that data that's out there has to maintain some level of integrity, meaning that you as the data owner wants to make sure that that object, as you put it out there, still exists in the way that you would expect it to. That speaks to the 4 billion checksum computations that are being run out there to make sure that, hey, this data from this owner who has entrusted us to maintain the integrity of it as a service, have the accessibility, have the durability. We always have to go out and perform operations to make sure that it's there. And over that course of the 17 years, as we've scaled from hundreds of thousands of objects stored to trillions of objects stored, that only increases the amount of checksums that you have to do regularly to make sure all that data is safe. And I've already talked about just, the growing number of data lakes that have been built on Amazon S3.
Curtis, there is a question.
Curtis, there's a question.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sure.
There's a question from David. And he says, would be interesting to know how many sites are contained in the 11 nines.
How many sites?
Yeah. how many sites are contained in the 11 nines of durability, I think.
Okay. So basically the 11 nines is a measure of, think about it in terms of the single object that's being stored. So I'm not sure if there's a way that I can come up with an answer for what he's asking there. But yeah, the 11 nines of durability speaks to, and you've really got to start thinking about the actual hardware that's being used to not only manage the data, but allowing you to be able to access it. It's basically a calculation of expectations around the mean time to failure for a given drive or device that's being able to manage that, meaning the more places you store a given object, the more likely that you're always going to have some level of access to it. So I hope that kind of helps answer the question there. Or if it didn't, maybe just give some kind of different understanding of what we actually mean when we talk about the durability. In terms of where you store the data within an S3 bucket, as we all are probably aware, there are 31 global regions of AWS around the globe. All of them provide the S3 service. So it doesn't matter if you're storing the object in Tokyo or if you're storing the object in Northern Virginia or any of those regions. As long as you store that object within the S3 service, then you are being provided that 11 nines of durability for those objects that are being stored within. Again, I hope that kind of helps answer the question there.
And there is another question from Thierry. Yeah, he says, hi, Curtis. You mentioned that most websites now store data in S3. Is it a possibility that a failure of S3 can occur? Does it become a single point of failure?
It can. We have this concept of always planning for failure because things can and will fail. It's kind of a very famous quote from our CTO, who, when he talks to customers, he reminds them that you always want to be able to have some level of recoverability of I guess just multi-region access in the event that something does fail. It's most likely that a website will experience a failure if they don't have some sort of a backup and recovery plan. We're probably starting to get a little out of the scope of some of the learnings for those of us on the call. But what we basically work with customers on doing is we will build what are called multi-region architectures, so that in the event any request, say you have a website that's being managed by a large organization, that large organization will build access to static images, other applications, things that are being driven by that website in multiple locations. Those locations could be geographic based for latency or recovery based for just what we're talking about. And what I mean by that is, take location A and location B. As long as both locations are functional, where that website request gets routed to may be more in line with where the geographical request is coming from. That way it can serve the request faster and it can get back to the user in shorter time or reduce latency. Say one of those sites goes down, then you're going to practically rely on that second site being available until you can get that down site functional or operational again. So I guess the long answer is yes. While that we provide a high level of durability and availability within a service like S3, in the event a bucket where you have data stored in has some trouble accessing it, the plan is to always have kind of a backup or that replication or that multi-region capability that we've been talking about to be able to go and access that data in another location.
Yeah, Curtis, there's another question. What's the difference between durability and availability?
Durability is a measure of the data always being there. Availability is a measure of you being able to access it at any given time. Availability can oftentimes be affected by just network connectivity. I can have high durability in my data, meaning that if I store it somewhere, it's always going to be there, but there could be a problem accessing it over the network at a certain point in time. Having trouble accessing it over the network would be a condition of lack of availability. Whereas if the network is secure and robust, but then you go out there and you're like, where is my data? It was once here, then that would be an issue of durability. You're more likely to have issues with availability by way of some sort of a network or connection problem. Or it could even be if the, say a site gets flooded by multiple requests and it's just taking longer because so many users are trying to access the data that they're able to get to it. Those are typically issues of availability versus durability. Does that help?
Leo, does that help?
Okay.
Yeah, greatly helps. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And
Awesome.
there is one more question. Is there
Sure.
any recovery charges?
Any recovery charges? Maybe elaborate a little more in terms of if
Eposi, do you want to elaborate the question? Eposi, can you unmute and speak?
it's okay. Let me, yeah, go ahead. Sorry if you're there.
I don't
Okay.
think she's there.
Okay, then maybe we will, I will ask
Come
her
back to that,
to,
yeah.
we'll come back to that later.
Okay. So I guess let me put it this way. If say we have a single data object and it's stored in multiple locations, typically replication will. So we talked about the replication. We talked about the ability for replication to be able to move that object to a second location. Yes, in the event that that data gets removed in the first location, there are opportunities to go to that second location to be able to retrieve that object and place it back in that other location there. There may be some levels of get and retrieve and data transfer charges that are associated with that. But let me take that one offline so that I can give a more accurate answer, because I want to understand the scenario specifically in terms of what he asked about recoverability charges.
There is a comment in the chat saying, I believe she's referring to retrieval charges.
Well, yeah. As a service, there's always going to be some level of retrieval charge, whether you're trying to recover data or not. That's kind of the nature of the service, basically.
I think
We can
have-
we can certainly go and visit some of the pricing a little later once we're navigating through the management console, if we'd like. That's certainly not a problem.
Curtis,
Okay.
I think we have a hand up. Yeah, over
Okay.
to you, Leo.
Yes, I would like to further clarify something. After the explanation of durability and availability, I would like to further know if there are any limitations with respect to S3.
Limitations in terms of availability and durability, you're saying, or anything related to the number of objects stored or the size of the object stored?
Yeah, just in total, like limitations with S3, because from the explanations, I can pinpoint like so many advantages of coming in contact or using or utilizing S3. I would like to know if there are any limitations with respect to S3.
There are some size limitations on the size of object that you can store. I'd actually like to take a quick moment to query some of the users here. Does anyone know the maximum size of an S3 object that can be stored in a bucket? Any answers? Any takers?
Tatiana says 5 terabytes.
Five
Bingo.
5
There we go.
terabytes.
terabyte.
Good
We
answer.
have, 3
Yeah.
people,
Yeah.
4, 5 terabytes.
Yep. again, probably a little too deep in scope for this discussion, but what I'll also mention is if you think about so I'm still on the slide here where we talk about a large number of objects being accessed in a service like S3. Let's trim that number down a little bit. Say I'm an organization, I'm a large media company, and I have hundreds of thousands of objects stored in an S3 bucket. If I don't do my upfront planning to well partition those objects within a bucket, then yeah, there are going to be some limitations in terms of what we refer to as throttling when you go and try to make requests to those objects. There is a potential for that to happen. S3 as a service does do a pretty good job of scaling in terms of making sure that, you know, when you have large requests to those objects that they can be retrieved. But and then again, this really gets into kind of the design and some of the advanced levels of understanding around how you go out and partition access to data so that you can prevent those sort of things from happening. Does that kind of help the question there? I'm going back to
Yeah.
Leo. Okay.
Yes. Yeah, definitely it helps. Thank you. So thank you a lot.
Okay, perfect. And I really do appreciate these questions. These are the kind of things that I really wanted to get an understanding of making sure that you guys had some opportunity to kind of bridge the gap in terms of, you know, what I wanted to bring and you know, kind of generate out of you guys. If I can focus real quick on just some understanding around the security and access control of S3. Has anyone ever heard of a service called Trusted Advisor? Trusted Advisor is one of the services that we offer that will actually help you watch certain attributes, certain elements of the services that you're using within your account to kind of help you along the way. There are some Trusted Advisor checks against billing, against the consumption of services, against some potential security issues. In the case of S3, you have the ability to make sure that the bucket permissions are basically what you are requiring them to be. And what I mean by that is if we're talking about S3 as a service that's going to be there to store and manage data, we have to be very mindful of just how sensitive that data might be to the respect of the organization. These could be data objects that have information about your customers that you certainly want to protect. These may be data objects that contain video and media assets that I referred to earlier that could be proprietary to your business. The last thing a television station or a streaming service would want to do is make their movies available or exposed in an unsecure way so that someone who's not a paying subscriber could actually go out there and have access to those assets. So security is always going to be a very important thing when it comes to storing and managing and securing your data objects. There's some levels of default encryption that we enable within a service like S3. Encryption being important in that if you don't actually have access to the encryption and decryption keys, then you effectively render the data useless in the event it is somehow maliciously retrieved. I can't underscore the importance of understanding what encryption does in terms of data protection and data integrity. As a service, when you go out and create an actual S3 bucket, we have what's enabled by default. We block public access to it. All along, we've been talking about S3 buckets being able to provide websites the ability to render pages, render images, provide some level of support for those publicly available websites. But in order for you to make the assets within an S3 bucket available publicly and globally to a larger audience, you have to actually go out and purposely enable public access as a security default bypass, to say, hey, we knowingly don't mind these assets being publicly available, which is good because you would never want the opposite to happen. Imagine a scenario if, say, you were a bank or some other institution or enterprise that had a requirement around maintaining the security of the data. If someone were to unknowingly go out, create an S3 bucket that had publicly available access and then start storing very restricted, very confidential data objects within that bucket, only to have them exposed to the world for the most part, then that would be a very, very unwanted situation for an organization there. So, one of the beauties of having a service like S3 is ensuring that you have to very purposely and deliberately go out and make access to those objects available. I'll just talk a little bit here about batch operations. I don't want to get into this too much. Again, this is one of those, as you start to extend your learning into some of the foundational aspects of S3 and object management, batch operations is something that's going to be something that you can take advantage of at scale. Think about, again, one of those scenarios where if I'm an organization and I have millions of objects stored in buckets, and I have to go and perform some operation on those objects. Is that the kind of thing I want to rely on from the command line or even from the management console for that matter? No, we would be doing way too much pointing and clicking and manual navigation and operation to the point where it just wouldn't be productive or efficient in terms of the business. So a service like batch operations allows you to go out and perform operations on a large number of objects in relatively low time. And as you can see, here are some examples of what you can do. You could do bucket to bucket copies. You could go out and do like a tag update or a tag replacement on certain objects. So something like that would be very helpful. I'll talk a little bit here about some of the cost optimizations. Has everybody been starting to get familiar with the various storage classes of S3 objects?
Yes.
Okay.
A few
Cool.
people, yeah.
Yeah. So basically what S3 does is it's not a kind of a one size fits all service, meaning that all objects are treated the same within an S3 bucket. For performance reasons, primarily for cost reasons, but and certainly for flexibility as well. You as customers or you as a user of S3 have some level of control about how you're going to designate various classes of storage for certain objects within S3. And that's largely driven by these different storage options that you're seeing here in these graphics. And we'll just kind of go from left to right. Where it mentions frequent is that for those objects within an S3 bucket that are requiring fairly frequent access, daily, weekly, and the like, you want to be able to take care of what we refer to as the standard class. The standard class will give you the best ability to retrieve those objects as fast as you can with the understanding that you are accessing them regularly. And then as we move ourselves kind of to the left of the graphic there, it's with varying degrees of access frequency. Again, don't want to go into these exhaustively. If anyone has any questions about anyone in particular, we can certainly do so. But again, just imagine on the far left, objects that need to be accessed essentially daily. And then if you move to the far right, those things that, and this goes back to the use case I talked about earlier in terms of being able to archive data for, long-term storage and compliance reasons. You want to put it in somewhere where we know it's going to adhere to those levels of durability that we talked about, but it would just be harder to retrieve. I would love for someone to maybe offer up an example of what they think would be a good business use case to archive data for long term. Do we have any thoughts from the attendees on what would make an archived use case for data? Again,
Yes.
all answers are good answers.
Okay, I can say maybe
Right.
for the
Do we have
hospital.
patients
hospital
records?
Yeah. I think that'd be a good example. Hospitals often want, or even doctors' offices, they want to be able to maintain records for long periods of time, to be able to go in and retrieve, or even just to have for compliance reasons. I think financial
You have
institutions,
bank services.
absolutely.
Bank, yeah, so
Absolutely. Again, I'm a little biased sometimes when I talk about media and entertainment because I used to work for customers in the media and entertainment industry. But imagine a television station that wants to be able to archive video assets from programs of the past, you know, whether they're sitcoms or classic movies, maybe, you know, multi-year programs that have been running on that station for years. There's an ability to go out and archive that data as well too. It's something that you want to have long term, but you don't always need immediate access to it. And there's certainly trade-offs, not just with S3, with any service that's going to be able to archive data. You know, you get to store it long term, you get to store it at less cost. But if you need it right away, then, you know, there has to be some expectation around just how fast you might be able to retrieve that data. And even the S3 Glacier service has gotten much better over time to be able to provide different levels of access times for the service. In fact, if you can see underneath that infrequent list there, sometimes you can access objects or archives within 3 hours, as opposed to maybe something like 12 or 15, based on whether or not you do what we refer to as instant retrieval, or whether or not we do something that refers to flexible retrieval. Using the media and entertainment example again, I always like to point to think about a scenario when if I'm a news organization and I have archive footage from, say, I don't know, maybe the 1980s or 70s of a world figure. You know, think about a former head of state or president or something like that have been out of office for years. If at some point during the modern day, you know, they happen to, you know, pass away or whatever, that's going to be a big story within that respective state or geographic location. News organizations are going to want to go and pull archive footage about that particular individual during their time in power or in government. That, to me, that's a classic use case. And it doesn't even have to be head of state. It could be, I think Pele was like the big story within the football world a few years ago. You know, he was a legendary, football player back in the 50s and 60s. You know, hadn't played for some time. His sports footage wasn't accessible for long periods, but once he passed away, global news organizations were going and replaying footage of, you know, Pele soccer masters. Think about that being a scenario where if S3 were the storage service of use, they would go and basically what we refer to as a thaw, an unfreezing of those Pele highlights out of a Glacier class of service, putting it back into standard for the short term so that you can now supply it to your media applications or stream it to a broadcast so that information is available there.
Curtis, on the chat, we have student records, court records as use cases for archives.
All of the above. Very good. I haven't been a student for a long time, so I would imagine my high school, my elementary school, even my college here in the state of Georgia where I live, don't access my records regularly. So yeah, those are also very good examples of data that gets archived. One of the benefits, while we're on the topic of S3, is imagine S3 as a service that can actually build automation by way of policy that will allow you to move that data through the different classes based on certain criteria. Is anyone here on the call familiar with lifecycle policies within Amazon? I'm going to come back on screen here for a second. Let me do a stop momentarily just to get back to the guys, because I can. Is everybody still seeing my screen, by the way?
Yes, we are.
Yes.
Okay. I'm trying to go out and do a screen stop here because I don't think oh, okay, I got it up here. I'll stop share momentarily. we can go back to the slides here in a minute. But is anyone on the call familiar with life cycle policies and life cycle management within S3?
I think most of us, we are familiar.
Okay. Again, I've been talking for a long time, you guys. I would love for someone who is comfortable enough, who is relaxed enough to just maybe come on and talk to me about your understanding of what a life cycle policy is and how it could be used within the context of what we're talking about with regards to these various S3 storage classes. Don't be shy.
Okay, I can let me take a shot at that.
There you go. Thanks, Leo.
Yes. Okay. How we can manage our data in S3? For example, I can take the scenario of let's say a hospital where you have a patient who just who comes in, and maybe you have that record. Maybe you have the test and everything of that record of which the patient has did some various kind of cross checks, some reports from the nurses. So at that point in time, when the patient is still maybe going through the medication, through the various doctors who access, so you can actually put it in a standard access where you have staffs in the hospital can access, the pharmacies can access also to give medications, and maybe when you can set a policy that maybe after 10 days, maybe when you after 30 days, maybe this patient must have been through, and if there's no access to these records, maybe they can shift it to maybe infrequent access 1A, like to reduce the cost as well. And maybe after more of 30 days or 90 days, if these documents are not being accessed again, you can then store it in the Glacier where it can be accessed maybe later on after years as a reference to know what this patient has been like, being the medical history, if it comes back maybe 5 years or 3 years after. So this can help to, let the patient, like the doctor, follow up this patient in this case. I think this can be a scenario where you can apply these advantages of S3 lifecycle management.
Perfect. Very good example. I appreciate you sharing that with us. If everyone can see the link that I just shared with you in the chat window there, and I'm glad you chose, let me do a share here real quick. Yeah, so I'm back to sharing now, and I'm actually glad you chose hospitals and patient records as an example, because one, I think it's a good one. Two, it can also lend itself to a very interesting lifecycle management use case. And what I mean by that is I actually covered that a little bit in this article that I wrote a few months back. It's called The Anatomy of Data Objects Through Lifecycle Management. This particular article didn't necessarily talk specifically about S3. Again, we talked about AWS is just one of many different ways. S3 within AWS is just one of many different ways that you can store data. The concept of lifecycle management, though, kind of extends itself across all data platforms. And I would certainly encourage you guys to read this at your liberty. But if you can see this access frequency chart that I'm showing right now, notice something different about patient medical records in this example. Student transcripts, which someone rightfully answered about earlier, seems to trend down more often when you're talking about length of time and the ability to access records. The same can be said about a feature-length film. The movie that was most popular back in 2020 is probably not as popular as it is in 2023 today. And over time, the ability for viewers to want to go and access those movies decreases over time, correct?
Yeah.
Think about a patient, though. We'd all like to think that when we're younger, we're healthy, we're vibrant, we don't need doctors. So it's actually more likely that our medical records may not be accessed more frequently. It's when we get older and we start to require more patient care that there could potentially be an upward trend in how our health records are accessed. And then although it may look a little morbid, there is some truth as to where you see that like very sharp decline in the access of patient medical records. Anybody care to indicate what that might be indicative of?
We die.
It's death. There you go.
It's dead.
Yeah. Again, it didn't intend for this to be solemn, but it was really just what I thought was a good example to try to illustrate what it means to understand data access cycles and how to be able to plan for it within a given organization. You know, again, just one example here, but you know, thanks to you, Leo, in terms of being able to just talk more in depth and specific around what it means to have lifecycle policies and how we as data managers can actually go about leveraging services and being able to write rules using tools that can go out there and automatically manage that for us. And then you can use certain things like date attributes. You can use your own defined tags. You could use size attributes, basically any type of information, or in the case of data objects, the metadata that we use to be able to have the right information to go out and have a better understanding of that. So I thought that was a great segue to be able to kind of move into that kind of discussion there. Any additional questions around anything else we've covered at the moment?
No.
All right. How's everybody liking the material and everything? Like I said, I really wanted to have the slides here just to kind of get our minds around thinking about these things. Would everybody maybe like to try to pivot and perhaps go into the management console and maybe even the command line to have kind of a different view of what it means to use a service like S3?
I think we have a hand up.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
It's from Titus. Titus.
Yeah,
can
thank you
ask.
so much. Yeah. Thank you so much. I have listened to Curtis Evans. Thank you for coming. I've heard you use the word globally as when it comes to S3.
Mhm.
A millions of times. You always say S3 global stuff and so on. There is some sort of this time that we always find it difficult in session, in learning process. We always debate. Someone say S3 is a global service. Based on what you have talked about, referring S3 as a global, you always mention the word global.
Okay.
I just want you to make it clear for us, especially because I know if this question is asked in the class, people have different views to us if S3 is a global service. To clarify the doubts, there's an article I just read somewhere, but it's too long for me to read it. But I just wanted to make it clear, to clarify the doubts if actually an S3 is a global service. And secondly, when you go to the console, when you go to an S3, you always see it is there, showing that it's global, right? So what is the takeaway can get from you as far as S3 is concerned?
Okay. Good question. And if I heard you correctly, it sounds like you're suggesting that we may want to just put some clarification and I should, you're right. I probably should put a little clarification around it in that, as a service that you're going to access within the AWS console, you're going to be building and creating and managing S3 buckets within a defined region. Let me go ahead and point that out too. What I probably should have been more specific in saying is that typically we refer to objects in an S3 bucket once they're configured as such as globally accessible. Does that help kind of clarify there? And what I can also do is I'll jump back into a share here, and I will also bring up a management console as part of this discussion. Is that where you were kind of heading with that request for clarification?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. And again, I appreciate that as such. So if everybody can see where I am right now with the screen share, are you guys able to see my AWS Management Console here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See that.
So again, Titus, thank you for that question. The references, the global references I've been making to S3 are more specific around objects within a bucket when configured being globally accessible. Because as we know that anytime you actually go out and name an S3 bucket, the name of that bucket has to be globally unique. Because we basically use almost like a DNS based DNS based namespace to globally refer to an S3 bucket. So for all those trillions of objects we talked about that are stored in probably hundreds of millions of buckets, all of those buckets have to have a globally unique name, because you can effectively stand up a static website within an S3 service. So that it's a globally accessible service, just for clarity. In terms of how you go and create buckets and manage S3 objects, that is done at the global level. If you got, excuse me, at the regional level, I apologize, regional level. If you see that I'm in my management console, I'm in the Northern Virginia region. In fact, you guys are, let me do something that's a little more international here. If I go to, why don't I go to London? Okay, so now I'm in the AWS London region. I go to my S3 console. Oddly enough, I do have a broad region view of all of the S3 buckets in my account. So within the management console, we have a global view of S3 buckets, or of the S3 service, I should say, but the buckets themselves have to be restricted to a given region. As you can see, I do most of my work within the US East and the US based regions. So I probably don't have many buckets outside of a US region here. But that's not to say that if I go out here and I create a bucket, I can go and, as you see by default, have it land in the EU West 2 or London region where it's going to be created. Again, I just have to make sure that it's globally unique. I'm going to go out here on a limb and say that there's probably already a bucket somewhere in the entire sphere of AWS S3 buckets that's already called my bucket. If this thing creates, I would be shocked. Nope. See there? Bucket with the same name already exists. So does that kind of help clarify the path we were trying to go down, Titus, in terms of just being a little more clear?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Anybody have many issues with creating S3 buckets when they go out and create them? Someone, anyone? Who has been involved? Who has been involved with much S3 bucket creation on the call?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Who was that? Someone wanted to speak up and talk about their use for their use of S3.
Yes, it's just a worry. Kind of not really like challenges of creating a bucket. I just wanted to ask a question.
Mm-hmm. Sure, go ahead.
I observe one of the slides that shows the different storage
classes.
Yes, yeah, classes for S3 bucket. Have the standard. Yeah, so yeah, perfect. Intelligent tiering and right up to S3 Glacier tip archive. So I wanted to ask, since we have been creating buckets, I don't know, is it, are you the one to like choose? Because I only know that when I'm about to create a bucket, I just go there, I create my bucket and just give the name of the bucket. I know the bucket is already created. So, but I've never come across these particular choices where I make a choice that the bucket I created, the storage has to be S3 Glacier or Intelligent Terrain. So I don't know, how can I see this? How can I really observe this? If really you can like show us at the level of your Amazon page, just as you try to, as you were trying to illustrate. So I don't know.
Okay. I want to make sure I understand the question properly. Are you asking if buckets have to be created based on the storage class in use?
Perfect.
Okay. All right. The short answer is no. And let me go, and I should be able to give me just a second here to adjust the view, because what I want to be able to do is give you an example of how a single S3 bucket can have several objects of varying storage classes, if that helps. And let me do just that. I need just a quick second to make sure. I found it right here. So let me go to this. I'm going to go back. I will bring everybody back into the share. I'm going to do a screen share. I will do a share. Okay. Everybody should be back on my management console, correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And is everybody good with the font size too? I want to make it large enough so that everyone can see, but not so big that it starts moving things off the screen. Can everyone see this size relatively fine?
It's fine.
Yes, yeah, it's fine. It's fine. That's fine.
Okay, perfect. So let's do this. I'm in my S3 dashboard. I have 27 buckets within this AWS account that span a number of different regions, mostly US East, Northern Virginia, west to Oregon. Let's see what else I have here. I think I've got, maybe that's another account I'm going to share. Oh, there's US East to Ohio. So as you can see, 27 buckets across 1 to 3 various regions. If I go to this bucket here in US East 1, I have a number of folders, which is part of my prefix structure within this S3 bucket. As you can see, I've got the name of each of the objects, whether it's a folder or an actual object. There's some other attributes about it, the type, the last modified, the size, etc. If I go into this folder right here, what do we notice about these objects within this single bucket? We have several different storage classes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
In a single S3 bucket within a single bucket prefix, I've got multiple classes. So basically that speaks to the flexibility that we've been talking about all day with respect to S3. I have control over tags or prefixes or other attributes to say, hey, I can build rules within my bucket without having to go and manage at the bucket level to determine which storage class my objects are going to reside in. It could be based on size. It could be based on age. If I were to go and put a tag, a metadata tag on some of those objects, then that too gives me enough opportunity, as Leo alluded to earlier, to where we can start writing lifecycle rules to go and determine how those objects get moved through those varying storage classes. And quite frankly, if I were to go and select, see, I have this one here in standard class currently. If I wanted to go and select this object, and I could then look at the action, and then I could edit the storage class if I wanted to. So by way of the management console, from a single object selected, I now have the ability to go and change it into a new class. In fact, I'm going to say, you know what? I've spoken to my staff, and we've determined that this particular object doesn't need to be accessed as frequent as the others for the foreseeable future. So to save a little bit of money by way of limited retrieval cost or retrieval needs, I'm going to now switch. Let me make sure I get the name of the object again, because they are so similar. I'm going to move this into the standard infrequent object class. That's going to be 2792. I'm just going to make a note of that. And by the way, these files I'm accessing are basically a type of media file. So when I go and I save the change, as you can see, it's going out, and the S3 service is now going and updating the classification of that object to say, hey, he is now in a different storage class. So that if I close this, if I go back out to the main path, and if I go look at 2792 again, as you can see, it too has changed. That was done manually. I could have just as easily done the same thing with a lifecycle policy to say, in X number of days, go out and adjust the storage class of this or multiple objects. Does that help answer the question?
Yes, it's really splendid. I've seen it now. Okay, then just like what I really asked, which automatically means I see you modifying or modifying the storage class, which just answer the question that, because I was like hoping that because I've never been like play with the bucket as you have done like this. I really appreciate it and say thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, so I can really now say that, okay, it means I can really modify my storage choice. Because I was just hoping that maybe when you just you create a bucket and put object inside at the bucket edges, maybe that is how maybe your Amazon shifts the data from the different level to the level of Glacier. So I now notice that you can create a bucket like today, maybe you send it directly to the Glacier's storage.
Okay. That would typically have to be something the customer would have to do. We do offer a storage of service, and I'm coming to it here in just a second. Do you see this intelligent tiering choice that I'm identifying here?
Yeah.
Intelligent tiering is one of those storage classes that helps customers who may have some level of uncertainty as to the access patterns of their objects. And what it means is it says, say you're a customer that says, I want to store some objects in the S3. I don't have a very good understanding of how exactly those objects are going to be accessed. So help me out. And the way we help you out is by way of putting them into this S3 intelligent tiering storage. And what that will do is it will monitor for a small fee the access pattern for the different objects within that bucket. And it'll say, if while I'm monitoring these objects, if they're not accessed within 30 days, I'm going to go move them into a lower tier or to a lower cost storage tier, based simply on the fact that no one's touched it. For those that are getting touched, they're going to remain in that other tier. So that basically helps you determine, by way of the actual access patterns, which you didn't have any awareness of to begin with, to say, hey, let's use this as our means for determining which storage class this belongs in. Now that is mostly specific to those objects that don't have some level of predictability. In most cases, I won't say all, there is some level of predictability because, companies know their business, they know their data patterns, they know their data access patterns, and then they can use that information to create better lifecycle stages and automation around them. So hopefully that helps in terms of just a different way of understanding how you can take advantage of some of these different classes and flexibility to be able to do things like
Yeah, get it.
Curtis, there is a question from Akko. Akko, is it possible for you to ask your question directly? Or
Yeah.
should I read it out? Okay.
Okay, I can. Okay, let me do so. Curtis, once again, we really appreciate your time and sharing with us the wonderful service of S3.
Thank you.
I currently work with cloud services, and my question directly relates to cost. So I think the question that I had was, well, while durability and and intelligent tiering is highly regarded across, I think from in my experience from customer feedback, one of the chief concerns that most clients have is not actually on the quality of the service itself, but it's actually managing costs with it. So when we look at S3, my observation is, and I think it's generally acknowledged by independent people, that the price is very good. So storing 100 terabytes of data, let's say on a monthly basis, is practically, you're only spending, you're spending well under $1,000 or even less. Mm-hmm. So on that level, I mean, it is great. I think where it comes into its own is that when you start putting in some safeguards, like, you want to put in a backup and a restore strategy, where you're going to have to do some, you're going to have to do some frequent snapshots or safeguarding that type of data, the cost starts to rise. So my question to you is, and I think this is one which I get from the customers that I'm dealing with, is what are kind of like the best things to do to kind of like to manage that cost, to manage those costs, whether there are any kind of like good recommendations. So I know you talked about Trust Advisor earlier, but whether that in itself would be, one of those tools that you'd use in, in cost management, because the buckets, we can always create the buckets out there, but in itself, I think the other thing which comes into it, a lot of our customers said, it's not what we switch on or we turn on that we worry about, is what we forget to switch off that we continuously get charged off. So it'll be great if you can just share with us some of your key tools or what you think will be the good kind of like cost management concepts or tools we can go with. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Happy to share. Thanks for the question. I guess the first thing I want to ask, and I mentioned being at AWS for 7 years now, and part of that time I was a solutions architect where I actually worked directly with accounts, and this was very part and parcel of what we would do for our customers, and these types of cost-related questions would come up often. So I think one of the first things I want to ask you is, how involved is the business that you are providing that data management for in those discussions? And what I mean by that is I'm hoping you, as part of the technical team or the data management team, isn't trying to solve this problem in isolation. I ask that because I think it's very important for the business who relies on the availability and the accessibility of that data to provide you all with some input and understanding to kind of help you determine that. Or are they at the table in that discussion is really my first question.
The answer is yes. But I think in the approach which the clients have, and I think what we try and do is provide some consultancy using a tried AWS method. This is the well-architected review.
Okay.
So they're coming with the intent that, look, we have these services which we've deployed in the cloud. How do we optimize it, or how do we modernize it in a way where we can, save costs in one area and then derive value in another area?
Right.
So that's kind of like where the discussion is going. Now, if you ask me whether they fully understand the whole business cycle or how they're using it, most often than not, that is part of the discussion of the engagement, where we're trying to do that together in real time. But what they would like to really get is Yes, if we can make a saving and that saving can be redirected into another area where we can explore the other wonderful assets of AWS, that's kind of like a space we'd like to be in, because most often than not, budgets can be very much fixed for a certain period of time. And unless, there's a very compelling business reason for them to say, okay, we'll have an extra budget to build, especially during these economic times, businesses are always looking for a means to cut down or reduce costs. Get more for less, really.
Okay. Akua, let's do this. I would invite you and I to have a follow-up conversation offline on this. And the reason I would like to do so is, I would love to get more into some of the specifics around what we can offer up to you, because there are going to be some additional options by way of, I mentioned a discussion with the business unit. I would love to see that result in some additional understanding around how you can do more tagging with the objects, doing more to build more predictability into the use or the access patterns, because that's really going to be the key to help driving those costs down. The third and most important thing I want to do, though, is I don't want to lose the rest of this audience into such a very detailed discussion around the business requirements that are going to drive the technical decisions, because I don't want them to lose sight of, just some of the more foundational things of what we're talking about here. Does that help in some regard? I'm even happy to stay on once we're done at the end of this session and spend another 10 or 15 minutes with you if you are so willing as well too. Is that possible?
No, that's absolutely fine. That's
Okay.
absolutely fine. Thank you.
All right,
Appreciate that.
cool. Yeah, I'd love to talk more about it right now, but I think we would be doing so at the expense of everyone else on the call. And I don't want to lose their trust by getting into something that's so, but I do think there are some suggestions that I can steer you down. And again, more than happy to talk to you about it a little more in depth, just to give you something to walk away with after this call. All right, perfect. I appreciate that.
And Curtis, if you don't mind, there's a question from Thierry. And he says, what scenario will it be better for one to create more buckets instead of using folders inside a single bucket, and vice versa?
Man, let me think that one through. Will it be better for one to create more buckets? I guess that's almost the blessing and the curse of being able to have the flexibility of creating one versus the other. You as the S3 administrator or manager of the data is ultimately going to have the right answer or the decision to do that. It's really something you have to think about in terms of trade-off. And I'll start the discussion around something that we probably are very familiar with, which is bucket policy. Before you start deciding one versus the other, make sure you understand what data you're storing, who needs access to that data, and how and when. Because I think those are the kind of things that are going to help you better establish whether or not you need more buckets, or whether you're not at liberty to just use a single bucket and manage it that way. One thing that I can suggest that might help is you could start looking at things in terms of maybe isolating bucket access by way of department or organization. You could also start accessing buckets by way of the classification of the data. And what I mean by that is, if you would probably want to avoid having publicly accessible data in the same bucket as business confidential data. You start to create yourself a potential nightmare in terms of being able to put the right level of bucket policy and object policy and user policy within a given bucket to be able to do something like that. I think part of the beauty also is you may, and please don't hold me to this entirely, but I would almost say when in doubt in terms of data protection and durability, you may want to consider going with another bucket. And the reason I say that is because, you probably have more flexibility in terms of granting permission and access across a number of buckets, as opposed to maybe having to go and undo something within an existing bucket where you discover there are enough data protection and access requirements that have changed that suggest that these objects can't live in the same bucket. And then that's where you're starting to look at something like S3 batch that I pointed to earlier, that you would probably have to go and start making some adjustments in. I can look to provide you with some additional references around best practices for when it's best to do that. In fact, I'm going to make a note of that. References for buckets versus objects in buckets. But the thing I can say for certain is, let security be your guide, because we, across the entirety of all AWS services, whether it's S3, whether it's EC2, whether it's pick your own service, we always preach from a security perspective what we refer to as the principle of least privilege. So if a number of organizations came to you and said, we have needs and requirements around storing objects in S3 buckets, and if this was multiple organizations, the thing that you could do first and most easiest is to identify, okay, who amongst us has the most business sensitive data? And for those organizations that raise their hands, you want to go and work with them specifically to say, okay, we're going to start putting controls in place so that only you have the least amount of access within this location for these objects. And you can pretty much get those off the table right away, and then just kind of focus on that next level of protection needs and requirements to determine one way versus the other. Does that help?
Thierry.
Theophile, do you want to say something?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Was that helpful?
Yeah, sorry, I was trying to get.
No worries.
Sometimes that button is not easy to reach, but thank you very much for your answer and
Sure.
Elaboration of those things. Yeah, sometimes it's very difficult to know which direction to go, whether it's more folders or another bucket, and yeah, sometimes also cost considerations might go in, but yeah.
Yeah, and that actually reminded me of something Tekla said at the outset when she was introducing me. I'm on the one hand, I'm excited. I'm the first person from AWS to sit with you guys, but on the other, I'm kind of discouraged that, we certainly need to do a better job of making sure that we can make resources like myself to connect with you guys to, cover things like networking or databases or some of the other domains that you're focusing on. And me being the first person from AWS that you guys have engaged with is probably the first time you will hear us often answer questions leading with, and I didn't do it specifically for that question, but what I essentially said to your answer was, and a lot of answers is, it really depends. There is no straightforward answer to a lot of these scenarios. Case in point that you just made about buckets versus prefixes within a bucket. It really depends on your use case. And again, I hope that goes back to help talking about data classification, talking about access privileges, even something like you probably wouldn't want to put production objects in the same bucket as development objects. So that could be driven by environments. The legal department doesn't need to have their assets stored with the PR department, things of that nature. So it really does depend. It boils down to the use cases, the requirements for those use cases, and what's going to be best for the organization.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much, Curtis. We are glad to have you.
Yeah. How are we doing on time? And I would love to get some feedback about whether or not we want to maybe try to get back into the management console to continue to answer some questions. I mentioned maybe even doing a few things with the command line as well too. again, everyone's session here, just want to make sure that I'm doing the things that you guys are most comfortable with. So I'm happy to take more questions. I'm happy to take more suggestions or requests about something that we want to see. Has everybody on the call seen enough bucket creation and uploading of objects into a bucket to where they're fine with that level of knowledge and understanding?
I see Leo has his hand. Okay, Leo, over to you.
All right, another question. Let's do it.
Yeah. Okay. I want to ask this question. As you showed on your demonstration where you had created most of your buckets in US East.
Mhm.
So this is my question goes. So if when you create your bucket in your region, as you said, when you access S3, it shows globally, right?
Mhm.
So if you do create your, let's say you have your point of presence in maybe in Africa, and you are in the US and you're accessing your bucket, is there that kind of, is there a latency issue which comes to accessing from, since it's globally seen? So if you're accessing from the US when you create your bucket in Africa, is there any latency issue with that?
There's going to be, and that's really that's a science thing. And I guess I want to make sure I'm clear. You're saying that if a user in Africa wants to access data objects in a bucket in this that's based in the US East, is there going to be latency between the two?
Yeah, I was just asking per your demonstration. For example, you had all your buckets in the US East. Maybe if you created another one in Europe, as you said, maybe you can access from Europe. So if you have data in Europe and you're accessing, since it's a global, as you said, you use a global view. So that's where my question comes in, whether there's going to be latency when accessing that.
Yes, yes. So global accessibility doesn't restrict latency concerns when it comes to geographic locations. And what I mean by that is, and we probably don't have enough tooling or time to do the test, but yeah, if we were to go and put a bucket, store an object in one of my buckets in US East 1, and then you and I were to do a download race to see who could get to that object faster, then yeah, obviously I would do it. In fact, why don't I do this? There used to be a site, S3. What I'm going to try to do here real quick, and I'm going to take a couple of seconds just to do this. And while I'm doing this, if everybody wants to take 2 minutes just to.
I was just going to say we are running out of time, and I don't know if we will.
We're coming up on the 2 hours.
Yes.
Oh man, this time flies.
It's getting quite
very interesting.
Unbelievable.
But I mean, I don't know if you still have some time to spare with us. So maybe you can maybe work on the console with you on your direction so that we can see some of those things. If you can extend a little bit more. If not, then we have to move on to the survey. But if you can, then we would love to.
Tekla, more than happy to. Time flies when you're having fun, as they say.
And I would love you to drop the survey already, so that those who are in Africa can also fill it in before they drop out. I don't know.
You know what? If there's any chance I can follow up with you on that, I'll need to. I apologize, but I was having trouble with my organization just switched to a new survey tool. So I'm going to need to follow up with you on that. Okay. I apologize, but I certainly, for those of you that are willing to stay on for another 15 or 20 minutes, I'm happy to do so too. If you have to drop, I certainly understand. I do want to thank you for the time today, but yeah, for those that want to stay on for a few more minutes, I'm happy to extend the discussion for another 15 minutes to get through this portion that we were just talking about. Does that help?
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Perfect. For those that are going to stay on, stick around. I've got something to show you. For those that are leaving, I look forward to connecting with you guys again soon. This has been super fun, and as far as I'm concerned, not enough time. We'll have to make it a day's event next time. So thank you guys for joining. All right, let me, so I'm going to say S3 data transfer test. And what I'm doing is transfer acceleration. What I'm trying to do is I'm going out and there used to be some websites where I could go out to and just simply say, hey, what would the speed look like? Is this it? Direct upload speed. I think I might have found it. Give me just a second here. Upload speed comparison in the selected region. I'm waiting to see if these other regions are going to be populated here. If this happens, then yeah, I'm gonna show you guys something here in just a second. Well, I'll tell you what, why don't I go ahead and do a share of the site. I'll share screen, I'll choose screen share. And I will actually copy the URL into the session here as well too. Chat, paste. Yes. Okay. Can everybody see what's happening here?
Yeah.
This website I just shared with you, and let me show you what it's doing exactly off to the side here. This speed checker uses multi-part uploads to transfer a file from my browser to various Amazon S3 regions using a service we call transfer acceleration. And basically what it's doing is it's comparing the results for each region. So from my respective location, which is, the southeastern United States, the city of Atlanta, Georgia, it's going out and simulating what's going to be the transfer speed from basically any of the various locations that I'm uploading from. And this is basically the result here. I'm actually a little surprised to see why I'm direct upload. Oh, okay. The percent fasters are for the various regions themselves. A direct upload versus the transfer upload speed. What this isn't showing me though is the actual millisecond or latency uploads. The 9% here is comparing the two different upload speeds from the different methods as opposed to the various regions, which I was hoping this would do. What I wanted to try to show actually was for me to upload into the US East 1 Virginia region would be a lot faster than me sending something out to US West 1, West 2, etc. I'm pretty sure there is a site that will do the actual regions. Let me see if I can't find that. S3 upload speeds, various regions. And Leo, while I look for that, is that the kind of question that you were getting at, to have that understanding? And again, to me, it goes back to just it's a distance issue. Even though the AWS backbone provides 100 gigabit network speeds across locations, because I sit in Atlanta, it's just going to be simply faster for me to get objects and assets out of the US East 1 region than I would going out to something in London or EMEA or one of the other regions out there. The same would be the case if I were to log into an EC2 instance and do a ping test. If I ping an EC2 instance that's in a region based in EMEA or Sydney or some other location much further away than where I am, then yeah, there's always going to be longer times.
Okay.
Are you familiar with CloudFront, by the way?
Yes, I'm familiar with CloudFront. Yeah.
Yeah. CloudFront is one of those edge services where for the right use case, that can be adjusted. And what I mean by that is if you think about CloudFront as a service, if I'm a US-based media company and I have assets that I store in my US East 1 bucket, for my global users, based on their use patterns, I'm going to start caching those assets using CloudFront a lot closer to them so that we can address that potential latency issue. Meaning that if I know that my viewers in Africa are going to want to access those same assets, then I'm going to start using my edge locations or my points of presence locations that are geographically closer to you to be able to start storing those assets there so that when you retrieve them, your latency is drastically reduced. You're no longer reaching US East 1 directly to get those assets. You're now getting those assets that are stored in US East 1, but then cached more closer to you so that you get a faster, better experience. That's basically what all of your media and streaming companies do. They put those assets closer to the end user so that there's not these long latencies in being able to retrieve that information.
Well understood. Thank you so much.
You bet. If there are no other questions, one other thing I can also show is, let me do this. You guys still seeing the management console here?
No. Oh yeah.
Okay, let me go do a share again. And I may have to switch accounts because I have access to a number of accounts and I can show a number of things here. Let me do this. I'm going to go to a new account. Is everybody seeing my screen now?
Yes.
Okay.
And while you're doing that, sorry, quickly, Curtis, I just want to announce to everyone that we have our internal survey that we have just put in, which can also be helpful. Please go ahead and fill that one as well. That can be helpful. Thank you.
You bet. And apologies for not having mine. Like I said, I ran into some issues, but I certainly want to get some feedback from you guys as well too. Anyone familiar with this multi-region access point service? Anybody? This is an interesting feature here. Multi-region access points offer a global S3 host name that provides access to multiple buckets across AWS regions with automatic routing and failover between buckets. What does that mean? Almost to the use case that we were just talking about. People in the US will have, because of speed of light, will have the ability to access objects in buckets that are in those regions versus anything that's further away from them. A way to try to combat that is if I'm a service or if I'm using AWS and I want to be able to address those with buckets and resources in multiple locations, I can consider using something like multi-region access points. Excuse me. And what I'm showing here is this multi-region access service is allowing me to create a bucket in US East Northern Virginia and a bucket in Sydney. And what I do for these two buckets is I create a global endpoint that's going to be able to reference both of those buckets, and it's going to route any objects that I put into them or objects that I retrieve from them from the closest location. So again, to the point we just made, if Northern Virginia is an option, if Sydney's an option, if a user in sub-Saharan Africa wants to go and access an object, I'm going to point them to a global endpoint. And then once they go and make that request from the global endpoint, the service is going to say, which of these locations is geographically closest to the end user? And then that's where I'm going to go and get my object. I'm going to pause there and kind of let that soak in there, just so everybody's understanding what I'm referring to there. Okay, hopefully that does. I'm sorry, was there someone that may have needed some clarification there?
Maybe take it over that again. I'm sure will help.
Oh, okay. No worries. So what we're trying to do is we are trying to provide a service to users that's going to keep latency low. And one of the opportunities we have to do so is to locate objects in multiple locations and then allow the location that's closest to that end user to serve their request so that they don't have issues of latency with being able to go and access those objects. Is that clear?
Yes. Yes.
So instead of having, if we were to take the Sydney bucket out of the equation, and all I had was all of my assets here in this US East 1 Virginia bucket, then I'm basically okay with my users in the US because they're pretty close. But that comes at the expense of users in South America, users in Africa, users in Asia, basically users all over the world because they're so far away, it's just literally going to take longer for that data to reach them. So one way I can potentially solve that is by creating multiple buckets. In this case, I'm just using 2, and creating a situation where if I place those same assets in a second location that's closer to them, then I'm giving them an opportunity to be able to retrieve the same information in reduced time. Again, I go back to the example of, I'm always heavily using media and entertainment, but it could be anything. It could be legal documents. It could be anything that just requires that those users get access to those objects by way of request as fast as they can. And I don't point them to this bucket. I don't point them to that bucket. What I'm pointing them to is a endpoint that says, hey, you just go and refer to the endpoint, and then I'll decide whether to get it in this bucket or whether to get it in that bucket. Does that help a little better?
Yeah.
Okay.
Quite an
Okay.
interesting feature, and we'll definitely be looking forward to look more into that. But it's quite an interesting feature. Thanks for that, Curtis.
Yeah, you're welcome. And then the beauty of having that multi-access feature is what I also do with the buckets is we talked about replication earlier. I set up some rules so that the replication makes sure that the buckets are always consistent in both locations, meaning if my user in Canada, who's closer to US East 1, uploads an object, US East 1 is going to be chosen because it's closest to Canada. The file is going to be uploaded into that bucket in US East 1, and then it's ultimately going to be replicated in the Sydney region so that when my users in Australia go and want to retrieve the same object, they don't have to go all the way back to US East 1 to retrieve that object. They're going to get it from the Sydney bucket where it has been replicated and made available closer to them. Okay.
Okay, Curtis, we are really running out of time. We have 3 more minutes. Just that you're aware.
Okay. I can start to wrap it up. Again, I hope you guys found this all useful. Like I said, I'm not a training and certification instructor, so I can be a little kind of, I guess, sort of all over the place with just the way we describe this stuff because there's so much to cover. But in the end, I hope you all found it useful. Again, would love to be able to come out, and I'll definitely remain in touch with Tekla and Yolanda. And if we feel that another session talking about something specific may be beneficiary, I would love to hear about it. And it's just a matter of just setting up this same environment and access to everyone, and we'll be more than happy to hone in it again.
And in the meantime, I would like to encourage everybody to fill in the survey we just sent, because the feedback would help us and it would also help Curtis. So while we are filling the survey, I don't know if we can give 2 people an opportunity to express themselves before Banjika concludes.
At least those that have not spoken, right? So many people have been quiet.
Yeah.
I
If-
know, yeah.
If you say nothing else but hello, I would love to hear from you.
So those who are interested to share their
Thoughts.
thoughts, yeah, we have a wisdom oracle. Wisdom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. First of all, Mr. Curtis, thank you very much for the presentation. It was so fantastic about the S3 buckets. I get some clarification about it now, and I gained so much from it. And then I have to thank the Board of Trustees, WeFund Cloud, that hosted, that made it possible for us to be part of the program this evening. Thank you very much. It is nice of all of you. And then I hope we can see you again, because I know there's a lot to talk about S3 bucket, and the way it was going, nobody noticed it's already 2 hours, 15 minutes. It shows it's a very interesting topic, and the clarification, how you demonstrated it, especially the last aspect of it now that you demonstrated, I really wanted it because it's really going to help me. So thank very much, and thanks for everybody that made it possible. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you
much,
as well.
Wisdom. I'm going to call on Dr. Vero.
Hi, good evening, and thanks so much, Curtis, for the presentation. I just love the ease with which you you did this. You know, yeah, as an expert, of course, and it's not always easy to break down things to people when you are an expert, but I did really enjoy it. Especially the last aspect, I will still check that out, but it was just so nice to know that there is a feature like that. And generally, I must say I did learn a lot, and also the questions from the attendees, I now got to really understand very well the difference between durability and availability, and like if someone wakes me from sleep now, I should be able to say it with so much confidence. Really appreciate you being here with us, and we look forward to your future presence with us. And the ladies will keep knocking at your door, I guess. So we want you more, Curtis. So if you can spare time, we will appreciate. Thank you so much.
I see some comments. I don't know if we have, okay, I give 3 more people a chance to share before Mr. Banjika concludes.
15 seconds, Tekla, if I may. So sometimes audiences feel like audiences, and then there are times today where audiences feel like friends. You guys feel like you are friends, and I really appreciate it. And I mean it with all sincerity. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have a comment in the chat. Yolanda, you want to read from Nuyu?
Nuyu says, it was my first time hearing about multi-region access points. Thanks, Curtis.
Yeah.
Glad I brought it up. Awesome.
So who else wants to share?
Maybe I should just, really, really thank Curtis for coming today. We are really happy we made this happen. And just to also let you know that your willingness to support this community is not something we take for granted. We are very, very, very grateful. Thanks so much.
Really appreciate that, Yolanda. Thank you. And I mean it too. I'm more than thrilled to get together and do this again. This is fun.
We have comments from Tatiana. She says, thank you. Thank you so much, Curtis. It's been so enriching. And from Leo, you are there. You can speak.
Yeah, I'll be speaking a lot, so let me keep you writing.
Leo says best session ever, and looking forward for more sessions, Curtis.
Oh, wow. No pressure, huh, Leo? Thank you.
Okay.
A bit of pressure, Curtis.
Yes. Yes.
So, every good thing comes to an end, and we are really, really happy to have you in our midst. And before we conclude, I would like to hand over the floor to the founder of WIFUN Cloud, Mr. Banji Kangor, who is working tooth and nail day and night to make sure that we meet and learn and gather some knowledge. Mr. Banjika, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Yolanda. And again, thank you thank you very much, Tekla. Thank you, Yolanda, for both of you bringing Curtis here. And Curtis, is really wonderful listening to you. And we are really so happy with the positive mindset you have about coming back here. A little bit about our community also, which is a very mixed background. As you notice, there are some of our members who have never, because they heard about this community, they have never worked with computers, but they come here. We start with fundamentals of Linux, then we do networking. We are really happy to have Akwo Fesi, you heard speaking, he's a subject matter expert in networking, Mike here, and lots of people like Dr. Vero. After learning in this group, they started also as beginners. They have been volunteering and teaching and mentoring others. So it's a community that is kind of self-sustaining, right? And it has been built up in a point where we just have people, when we call on them, we have a group of practitioners. Some of them have never used computer, they want to learn AWS Cloud Practitioner. So that is the kind of group we have, and it's been really great because we have recorded so much successes. I'm sure you saw in the statistics. And the idea of maybe coming again back with maybe it could be other avenues, maybe from others, networking or databases. I can guarantee you this community will welcome it. And my encouragement for everyone is please speak to that in the survey so that when we share that data also with Curtis, it can really help him appreciate the discussion that you have. I know some of you have expressed your words, but for those who are a bit shy, and I know they will get very comfortable with you, so they will do that in the survey. So it's really been great having and listening to you. I personally has learned a few things, especially the last feature you just demonstrated. I didn't know that existed. So again, it's a learning day for everyone here. And the team here is a very motivated and ready to learn. That's why they sacrifice Saturdays to do this and sacrifice their mornings, 5:30 to 7 a.m. That's when we have our sessions, because after that, everyone goes to work. So having you here today is testimony of the fact that what we are doing is definitely in the right direction. And you saying that you would like to come again, we can always know how to manage that. So thank you very much. And again, we are grateful.
Truly an honor, Banjika. Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate it.
So Curtis, I'm sure you're going to share your contacts for those who want to follow you on LinkedIn, for those who want to know you more, who want to, I don't know if we are done for today. It's an open discussion now, except Curtis, you want to continue with Akwo, or are you booking another appointment?
I have a few more minutes if you do Akwo.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
I'm fine with it. I don't know whether we should do it on open session or whether there may be some people that may find it useful as well. So at least I'm happy to do that.
Yeah. I think that's okay, Akwo. I think it was just to help those who are leaving. I think I can take the recording off now, if you wouldn't mind. So for